Imagine for a second that you are holding a beautifully crafted object in your hands. It could be a marble sculpture, a painted canvas, or honestly, even a really elegant string of code.
Right.
You're looking at it, and I want you to ask yourself, who actually made this? I mean, was it the person who had the idea, or was it the tool that physically shaped it?
That is the exact question we have to figure out right now, because it gets incredibly messy when you bring AI into the picture.
It really does. And welcome to the deep dive. If you're listening to this, you are probably so tired of the extremes. It feels like every time you open an app or read an article, you're bombarded with these wild narratives about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's always either a magical utopian wand that's going to solve all our problems, or it's, this dystopian Terminator coming for all of our jobs.
Exactly. It's like we are all stuck in this chaotic, incredibly crowded room where everyone is just shouting over each other.
Very loud, very exhausting room.
All right, so our goal today is to basically walk out of that room.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to step into a quiet library, look back at history, and get a completely different, highly illuminating lens on what is actually happening with human creativity and AI right now.
And we have the perfect road rep for this. We're looking at a fascinating presentation that was given at the Artifact Project launch event. This was in Rome at the DTC Lazio headquarters back on May 22, 2026.
Oh, nice. Who was the speaker?
It was delivered by Bruno Capisoli from the creative studio Ultravioletto, and his presentation had this very specific, powerful title, Mito, Strumento, Opera, which translates from Italian to Myth, Instrument, Work.
Myth, instrument, work. I love how grounded that sounds.
It really is. Capizzoli uses those three words to completely dismantle the tech bro hype cycle. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack these three concepts because, honestly, they are the absolute best framework for understanding our relationship with AI.
Okay, so let's jump right into the first one, myth. Because the way we talk about AI today is basically pure mythology, right? We talk about it like it's this alien intelligence.
We do.
Yep.
But Capizzoli bypasses all the sci-fi stuff and anchors his argument in a very old, very real Roman myth. It comes from an author named Hyginus, who was writing in the 1st century A.D. He put together this text called the Fabulae.
The Fabulae, okay.
Yeah, and inside it, there's this incredible story about a goddess named Cura. And Cura translates directly from Latin to care.
Oh, interesting, care.
Right. So the myth goes like this. Cura is walking by herself, and she comes to a river. She looks down and sees this muddy clay on the riverbank, and she just bends down and starts shaping it.
She's just playing with the mud.
Exactly. She's molding this raw, wet earth into the figure of a human being. She's totally absorbed in the physical act of crafting it. And while she's holding this wet clay figure, Jupiter, the king of the gods, happens to walk by.
Talk about good timing.
Right. So Cura looks at Jupiter and says, hey, can you give this thing a spirit? And Jupiter agrees. He gives it the divine spark of life. The creature opens its eyes.
Okay, so she shaped it, he brought it to life. That sounds like a nice team effort.
You'd think so. But the second it comes alive, this massive cosmic custody battle breaks out. Jupiter immediately says, okay, the creature is mine because I gave it the spark of life.
I mean, typical Jupiter move.
Yeah, taking all the credit. But then the Earth itself speaks up. The Earth argues, wait a minute, the physical material, the mud and the clay came from my body, so the creature belongs to me.
Oh, wow. So you have the spirit claiming it and the raw material claiming it. Where does Cura fit in?
Cura argues that because she was the one who physically took the time to shape it, because she held it and formed it, it belongs to her. They literally cannot figure this out, so they call in Saturn, the ancient god of time, to be the judge.
And what does Saturn decide? Because that feels like a really tough call.
Saturn's ruling is brilliant. He says, look, when this creature eventually dies, its spirit will go back to Jupiter, and its physical body will return to the Earth.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Right. But Saturn says, as long as the creature is alive, as long as it exists in the world, it belongs to Cura. It belongs to care.
Wow. Because she's the one who gave it form.
Exactly. She intentionally formed it. She took responsibility for its shape. And Capizzoli uses this myth to introduce a major philosophical concept. He points to the 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger.
Okay, Heidegger's pretty heavy stuff.
He is. But Heidegger loved the specific myth so much that he put it right at the center of his most famous book, Being and Time, specifically in section 42. Heidegger was trying to define what it means to be human, what he called Dasein, or being there.
And how did the myth of Cura fit into that?
Heidegger argued that the essence of human existence is Sorge. That's the German word for care. But he doesn't mean care, like a gentle hug. He means concern, custody, taking in charge.
Taking in charge. So it's an active, deliberate thing.
Yes. It's the undeniable responsibility we have for the things we bring into the world. Now, layer that over how we use AI today.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. When you sit at your computer, the massive data set, all those billions of parameters, that's just the earth. It's the raw clay. And the algorithm's processing power, its ability to instantly compile things, that's Jupiter's spark of life.
But the actual creation, the output, belongs to the one who applies care.
Exactly. The final image or text doesn't belong to the database or the algorithm. It belongs to the person who carefully shapes and tends to it. Without the human taking in charge, you just have mud and sparks.
Okay, wait. I want to gently push back on this for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Because if I go online right now, open an AI tool, and type in a one-sentence prompt like, I don't know, a cyberpunk cat eating pizza, and I
Yeah.
just hit enter. 5 seconds later, I get a perfect polished image.
Right.
Am I really exhibiting care in that moment? Because honestly, it feels like I'm just outsourcing the entire shaping process to the machine. I didn't mold any clay there.
That is the crucial distinction. And you're entirely right. In that scenario, you are not exhibiting care. You are not creating, you are just consuming. Capizzuoli is saying that true creation requires friction. If you just type a prompt and take the very first thing the machine spits out, you are abdicating your role as cura.
I'm just letting Jupiter and the Earth do whatever they want.
Exactly. To actually claim ownership, you have to treat that AI output not as a finished masterpiece, but as the raw clay. You have to take it, edit it, mold it, iterate on it. You have to take responsibility for it.
So it's about the effort, the friction. But, we've gotten so used to this idea that tools should be perfectly frictionless. We've separated the idea part of art from the messy technique part.
And that separation is actually a very modern historical anomaly. Which brings us to the second part of Capizzuoli's argument, re-emerging art and technique, or as the ancient Greeks called it, techne.
Okay, so how did the Greeks view this?
Well, if you walked up to a citizen in ancient Athens, they wouldn't understand our modern divide. In Greek, the word for art and the word for technique are the exact same word, techne.
Wait, really? So they made no distinction at all?
None. To them, a master sculptor carefully chiseling a marble statue and a sandal maker cutting leather for a shoe were practicing the exact same thing. Aristotle defined techne as the knowing that makes.
The knowing that makes, that's a beautiful phrase. What does it actually mean?
It means you don't just figure the world out by sitting in a room thinking abstract thoughts. You come to understand a material, like marble or leather, through the physical act of producing something with it. The knowledge is in the making.
Okay, so if the Greeks had this unified view, when did we decide that artists were these magical geniuses and technicians were just, pushing buttons?
We lost it during the Industrial Revolution. That's when everything fractured. Before factories, a single craftsperson controlled the whole process, right? But then factories came along and introduced the hyper-specialization of labor.
Right, the assembly line. You're not building a whole chair. You're just hammering one nail for 12 hours a day.
Exactly. The worker was completely alienated from the final product. And as a cultural reaction to that awful mechanical factory reality, society invented the romantic idea of the creative genius. We started pretending that true art is just a burst of divine inspiration, completely separate from the dirty mechanical work of technique.
It's totally like we took a recipe and decided that the person who writes the cookbook is a brilliant artist, but the person who actually masters the oven and bakes the cake is just a technician. The Greeks would look at us like we were crazy.
They absolutely would. And Capizzuoli argues that saying AI is technology, not art, is just us clinging to that post-industrial hangover. It's a cultural choice to mutilate the concept of techne. When we recombine them, AI stops being this terrifying other and just becomes a continuation of human techne.
Just a new way of knowing that makes.
Right? But to understand how this specific AI instrument works, Capizzuoli uses an amazing historical parallel. He says we shouldn't look at modern computers, we need to look at the medieval scribe.
The monks copying books by hand.
Yes. For nearly 1,000 years, the scribe was the way European culture was preserved. And we have this modern misconception that a scribe was basically a biological photocopier, just perfectly replicating text.
Right, just staring at a page and writing it down exactly as it is.
But that's not true at all. Scribes constantly transformed the text they copied. They added variants. If they couldn't read a faded word, they guessed, changing the meaning. They added glosses in the margins. They drew elaborate miniatures. Sometimes they even left hidden signatures or complaints about the cold.
Oh, wow, so every copy was basically a unique mutation of the original.
Exactly. The scribe was the West's first generative model. They took an input, processed it through their own physical and mental state, and generated an output that was never identical. And functionally, that is how modern text-based generative AI works.
It takes your prompt, processes it, and generates something new. But wait, there has to be a difference between a human monk making a mistake and ChatGPT hallucinating a fake fact, right?
It's a massive difference. And this is the core philosophical distinction Capezzuoli makes. When a human scribe makes an error or changes a word, that error carries meaning. It reflects their culture, their biases, their intent.
A miniature drawing in the margin is a commentary. It's intentional.
Yes. But an AI's error, a hallucination, is purely statistical. An AI doesn't have intent. It calculates the most probable sequence of words based on its training data, so its error is just mathematical noise. It carries the average of its data.
The average.
Right. And Cappezzoli says firmly, the average is never a cultural act.
Wow, the average is never a cultural act. That completely dismantles the myth that the AI is an independent creator.
It does. It proves that AI is not a myth. It is an instrument.
But if the AI's hallucination is just mathematical averaging, does that mean true art actually requires human imperfection? Like, is our flaw our superpower here?
Absolutely. The human fiction, the intent behind the flaw, is what creates culture. Which brings us to the second word in the title, instrument, or Act 2. The instrument precedes the aesthetic.
Okay, so how do instruments actually drive art forward?
Let's jump to the year 1841. There was an American painter named John Gough Rand. He patented something that completely changed the history of art, though almost nobody knows his name today. He patented the resealable tin tube for oil paint.
Wait, a paint tube, like the ones you buy at an art supply store today?
Exactly.
Why was that such a big deal? What were they using before 1841?
They were using pig's bladders.
Oh, gross. Seriously?
Seriously, painters had to grind their own pigments by hand, mix them with oil, and then store the wet paint in actual pig's bladders. You would prick a hole in the bladder with a tack, squeeze out the paint, and try to plug the hole again.
That sounds incredibly messy and fragile.
It was. And the bladders weren't airtight once you punctured them. The paint would dry out and ruin in a matter of hours. So artists were physically trapped in their studios. You couldn't just throw a pig's bladder of wet, expensive paint in a bag and hike up a mountain.
So you had to paint landscapes from memory inside a dark studio.
Right. The instrument, or the limitation of the instrument, dictated a very dark, structured aesthetic. But then Rand invents the tin tube. It's cheap, it's durable, and it's airtight.
And suddenly, you can take your paints outside.
Yes, you can go sit in a field and paint the sunlight exactly as it looks in that very moment. Cappezzoli quotes the artist Renoir, Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Renoir said that without paints and tubes, there'd be no Cézanne, no Monet, no Pissarro.
No Impressionism.
Exactly. Without that simple tin tube, the entire Impressionist movement wouldn't exist. The instrument arrives before the aesthetic.
That is fascinating. The tool wasn't invented to create Impressionism. It was probably just invented to make paint easier to sell.
Precisely. An artist took it and explored the newly opened possibilities. Cappezzoli gives another incredible example of this, jumping forward 130 years to 1970s New York. Have you ever heard of the musical duo Suicide?
Oh, Alan Vega and Martin Rev, right. They're legendary in the punk scene.
Yes. They took a very specific instrument, a cheap drum machine, and completely changed music. It was a drum machine meant to sit on top of a home organ to give amateur players a little polite bossa nova or lounge beat.
Like the preset rhythms you'd hear in a suburban living room.
Exactly. But Suicide didn't want a polite beat. They took this minor instrument, ignored how it was supposed to be used, and they hijacked it. They overloaded the circuits. The slide notes from the presentation actually say, could you make it faster? 200 BPM is fast enough.
Wow. Pushing it to 200 beats per minute. That machine was absolutely not designed for that.
No, it wasn't. But by hijacking it, they birthed the foundations of synth punk, electro, industrial, and techno music. They didn't ask permission from the engineers who built the drum machine. They just forced it to do what they wanted.
It's so much like skateboarding.
How so?
Well, urban planners didn't build empty swimming pools and handrails and concrete ledges so kids could do tricks on them. The infrastructure was built for walking or draining water. But the kids hijacked the urban infrastructure and turned it into an art form. AI is basically just the new concrete.
That is the perfect analogy. You have to hijack the infrastructure.
Uh,
But here is the problem, and this is where Capizoli gets into the real danger of our current moment. To hijack a skateboard or a drum machine, you have to actually understand how it works.
right.
And right now, we are using AI tools that we do not understand. Capizoli contrasts two design philosophies to explain this danger. First, he talks about the great Italian designer Enzo Mari. Mari wrote a book called Progetto e Passione.
Project and passion.
Yes. And Mari believed that design is an ethical act. You have to take responsibility for what you put into the world. He created a project called Autoprogettazione Self-Design. He designed shares like the famous Sedia 1, but he didn't build them. He just gave people the blueprints.
Oh, I've seen those. You basically buy some cheap wood planks and nails and build it yourself.
Exactly. The point was to make the user understand the instrument. By physically hammering the nails, you circulate knowledge. You understand the friction of the material. Now, contrasts Mari with a concept from a 2025 book by Silvio LaRusso called The Designer Without Qualities.
The designer without qualities. That's a nod to the Robert Musil novel, right?
Yes, the man without qualities. LaRusso is describing today's precarious gig economy designer. This is a person who uses massive AI models, ChatGPT, Midjourney, but has no idea how they work.
They're just typing in prompts.
Right. They are using tools they don't understand on platforms they don't control. And Capizoli warns that this is a huge trap. Tech companies sell this as democratization, but really it's an extreme asymmetry of power.
But wait, isn't the whole appeal of AI that I don't have to know how it works? Like, I don't know how the microchip in my phone works, but I still use it. You're telling me convenience is actually a trap.
Yes. Because if you don't understand the instrument, you are not designing the output. You are being designed by the instrument. If you just accept the statistical average the machine hands you, you become the designer without qualities.
You're just a conduit for the tech company's algorithm.
Exactly. And that leads to a much darker consequence. If everyone is just lazily accepting the statistical average, what happens to global culture?
It flattens out.
Yes. And to explain this, Capizoli brings in some very heavy 20th century political philosophy.
Okay, really quickly before we dive into this part, I want to explicitly state to our listener that we are about to discuss some historically charged political concepts from the source material. We as a show are absolutely not taking any political sides here. We are merely objectively exploring the speaker's philosophical arguments to understand his point about AI.
Absolutely. It's just the historical framework he uses.
Yeah.
So Capizoli points to Walter Benjamin, a thinker who observed Europe in 1936. Benjamin noted that fascism relies on the aestheticization of politics.
The aestheticization of politics.
Yeah.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning mass spectacle. Think of those massive, terrifying rallies. Perfect symmetry, synchronized movements, uniform visuals. Benjamin argued that a highly aestheticized society, one that values a unified, flawless surface over messy individuality, has a fascist heart. It forces everyone into the exact same mold.
Right.
Then, Capizoli brings in Pier Paolo Pasolini from 1974. Pasolini looked at that idea and shifted it. He argued that the true totalitarianism of the modern era isn't a dictator, it's consumer society.
Consumer society.
Yeah.
Because of advertising.
Because of the homogenization of desire. Pasolini saw television wiping out local dialects in Italy and replacing them with a single, flattened consumer identity. He argued consumerism enforces an aesthetic from below. It achieves total homogenization without ever giving a direct order.
People just willingly buy into the sameness.
Exactly. And Capizoli's core thesis is that generative AI is the technological absolute peak of this movement. Because what does generative AI fundamentally do? It returns the statistical average.
Right, the latent space math. It finds the most probable expected tokens.
Yes. So imagine a planetary scale machine that only produces the average. The same lighting, the same perfect plastic-looking skin in images, the same polite corporate tone in text. It performs the ultimate homogenization.
So if AI is mathematically programmed to give us what is most average or expected, how do we stop global culture from flatlining into one giant repetitive echo chamber?
That is the million-dollar question. And it brings us to the final act of the presentation. Act 3, work, or in Italian, opera. How do we actually make work that refuses to submit to the average?
Right.
How do we fight back? Capazzuoli shows 2 real-world art installations created by his studio, Ultravioletto, to answer this. The first one is called Urban Oracle.
Urban Oracle.
But to explain it, he traces a history of artists recombining human voices. He starts in Paris, 1959, at the Beat Hotel. William Burroughs and Brian Gysin invented the cut-up technique.
Oh, I know this. They literally took newspapers and cut them up with scissors, right?
Yeah. Yes. And they randomly rearranged the pieces to find new hidden meanings in the text. They prove that meaning doesn't just come from linear writing. It comes from collision, recombination.
Okay, so that's text. What about audio?
Well, Capazzuoli jumps to the 1970s and 80s to the Bronx and Detroit. Hip-hop and techno producers. They took existing vinyl records and sampled them. They took a drum break from an old soul record and looped it to make something entirely new.
But there's a difference there, isn't there? In hip-hop, you want people to recognize the sample.
Exactly. Hip-hop explicitly credits its sources. It's a conversation with the past. So taking that history of recombination and citation, Ultravioletto built the Urban Oracle.
What does the installation actually look like?
It's a physical structure made of LED tubes and kinetic modules. A visitor walks up, types a question on a keyboard, and the machine answers them by scrolling text in light.
Like a futuristic fortune teller. What's powering it?
Here is the genius part. They didn't just hook it up to a generic OpenAI or Google model. The dataset itself is the artwork. They trained it exclusively on 2 very specific bodies of text.
Just 2. What were they?
First, ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, Seneca, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius.
Okay, heavy stoicism. And the second?
Every single hip-hop lyric written from the 1970s to the early 2000s. Tupac, Biggie, Wu-Tang.
Wait, what? Stoic philosophy and golden age hip-hop. That is such a wild combination.
It sounds wild, but think about what both of those genres discuss. They both obsessively talk about mortality, loyalty, the harsh reality of the streets, money, and what it means to live a good life.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that, but you're completely right. They are exploring the exact same themes.
So when a visitor asks the oracle a question, the machine recombines Seneca and Biggie. It merges Aristotle and Tupac. And because both philosophers and hip-hop artists constantly cite their predecessors, the AI does the same. It makes the gesture of the medieval scribe. It names where it speaks from.
It's like building a time machine out of words. The tool isn't thinking for you. It's just hosting a dinner party between a Roman Stoic and a 90s rapper to answer your questions about life.
That is a perfect way to put it. The average becomes legible and meaningful because the artist hijacked the dataset. But there is a darker side to data, which brings us to their second installation. Neural mirror.
Neural mirror. Sounds a bit Black Mirror-esque.
It is. This piece tackles the concept of extraction. And again, Capazzuoli uses 2 historical quotes to set it up. The first is from 1992, from a researcher named Giacomo Rizzolatti at the University of Parma. He discovered mirror neurons in macaque monkeys.
Mirror neurons. What do those do?
They prove that empathy is biological. If I watch you pick up a cup of coffee, the exact same neurons fire in my brain as if I were picking it up myself. Cognition literally begins with empathetic mirroring.
That's amazing. We are biologically wired to understand each other.
Yes, but then Capazzuoli contrasts that with a quote from 2006. A mathematician named Clive Humby coined a phrase you've definitely heard. Data is the new oil.
Ugh, yes. The worst corporate catchphrase ever.
Right. It turns human behavior, our empathy, our lives, into an extractable raw material. So Ultravioletto created the neural mirror installation to force a choice between Rizzolatti's empathetic mirror and corporate AI's extractive mirror.
How does the installation work?
They debuted it in 2019 in Spoleto. You walk up and look into a large OLED mirror. You see your reflection. But behind the glass, a depth-sensing camera is scanning you. And suddenly, your reflection turns into an AI-generated point cloud. You become this ghostly digital duplicate.
Oh, so you're watching yourself turn into data.
Exactly. And the AI is guessing your age, your gender, your ethnicity, your mood.
Yeah.
And right next to the screen, there is a physical machine and an industrial receipt printer.
Like at a grocery store.
Yes. And as the AI analyzes you, the printer starts violently spitting out a physical roll of paper with the JSON strings of your captured data.
Wait, JSON strings, like the actual raw code?
Yes. Age, 34. Emotion, neutral gender, male.
By making the invisible code physical with that receipt printer, does the artwork basically break the spell of the magical algorithm? Like, it exposes the corporate surveillance beneath it.
It shatters the spell completely. It proves there is no intelligence inside the machine, no empathetic mirror neurons, just a mechanism instructed to reduce you to a monetizable string of data.
Mm.
It forces you to realize you are the oil.
That is incredibly chilling.
It is, but it's necessary to understand what AI actually is. It is not a myth. It is an instrument. It is not an alien creator. It recombines our history. And it is a mirror reflecting our data back at us.
Which brings us back to the human element. How do we respond to this?
Well, Katsiwali ends his presentation with this amazing meta-level reveal. He tells the audience that he actually used an AI to help him prepare the very talk they just listened to.
Wait, really? The whole presentation was written by AI?
No, not at all. He was very careful. He didn't let it write the ideas. He used it as the amanuensis, the scribe. He dictated to it. It proposed things. It made mistakes. It hallucinated, and he corrected it.
He treated it like the messy scribe.
Exactly. He hijacked it and made it his own. The difference between an AI generating average text and an artist creating a masterpiece isn't about the software's capacity. It is entirely about responsibility.
Wow. It's about Kira.
Yes, it all comes back to care. Which leaves us with a final provocation for you, the listener. The future is not some pre-written sci-fi script. It isn't a Black Mirror episode you just have to watch happen.
Right.
The future is a project. Think about the Roman goddess Cura shaping the clay. Moving forward, as you interact with technology in your own life and work, how are you going to practice care?
Are you going to be the designer without qualities, just blindly pushing buttons and accepting whatever the machine spits out?
Or will you take responsibility, learn the tool, hijack the instrument, and actually shape your own future? The choice is entirely yours.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you hold a beautiful